Let's together take a look at this study by Stark et al. In 2008 about graphic warning label in the ad for reduced exposure products. Okay, it's about the persuasion study. Now, if you review an article, the first question usually I ask will be if it's an experiment or it's a correlational study. Now, the clue usually can be found in the abstract. So you read the whole thing. The clue in this case probably revealed at the very few last sentences. So you look at here, say the present study examines the influence of graphic warning labels on rating of advertisements for 3 different types of tobacco products. Now, when they use the word influence, usually indicate cause and effect. And cause and effect is only in the experiment, okay? And also it says results showed that including a graphic picture lowered the appeal ratings for the product. So that obviously they manipulate something to cause the ratings to go down, right? So that again implies a cause and effect. So this is an should be an experiment. Of course, if you want to make sure, you need to go to the method to be sure. Now, on the other hand, if this is a correlational studies, then usually they will just indicate relationships. They are much less likely to use the words like influence or graphic. Now, in the lectures, we talked about independent variables and dependent variables in the experiment. And also we talked about correlation. So this part, you should get a hint already. Anyhow, now the question is if it is experiment, if it is an independent variable, what will be the independent variable and what will be the dependent variable? To decide IB and DV, usually we go directly to the method. And we can take a look at the procedure. Now, if you take a look at this procedure, I mean, it's quite long. And this study is particularly complicated. It's no more than complicated than a lot of other studies. But I understand being undergraduate students, you don't come across studies a lot. So relatively, this is a somehow complicated study. So they started describing the independent variables. The first clue is right here. Participants view 3 advertisements for tobacco products. That already indicate one IV with 3 levels or 3 conditions, right? Also here they also mention half of the participants view advertisements with the standard Surgeon General's tobacco warning label, and half view the otherwise whatever, right? So this indicates that there are more than one independent variable. Now we haven't talked about this yet, but the best way to know how many independent variables are there in the study is right here. Most of the studies that they will explain if there's an experiment, how they analyze the data. This sentence is about the design, and I'll explain this. Later we'll go into detail, but now let me just explain it. You see, this is a 2 and in parentheses picture present versus absent by 2 label large versus small by 3 products. These 3 products mixed factorial design. Now, don't care about what this mix of vectorial design is. We'll talk about it toward the end of semester. But look at right here. These two indicate that there are two conditions. And yes, this pictures that means one independent variable. So the next independent variable is labeled, and there are two conditions: large versus small. And then you guess what? Yes, this independent variable is the product, and there are three conditions. So how many independent variables are there in this study? 1, 2, and 3. Okay, again, 1 picture, 2 label, and 3 product. So in total, there are 3 independent variables. Now, how about dependent variables? Dependent variables is the question they ask. Actually, it's the answers from the participants, and usually they will show it on the table. Of course, here they explain. So participants answer questions about the appeals, interest in trying the products. Those are the dependent variables. But you can see there are a lot. So let's this is the result now. Let's take a look at the table. Those numbers are dependent variables. So you see appeal of advertisements, interest in trying products. Each one of them is the dependent variables. So there are a lot of them. Usually you don't see so many dependent variables. This study is kind of like a little bit special about that. With too many independent variables and maybe too many dependent variables, that is not necessarily a good thing. And that's why this study is a little bit special. Right. Okay. So now we identify IV and DV. What are the hypotheses? Okay, hypothesis usually is at the end of the discussion. So let's go back. Okay, before method, this is a discussion. And let's take a look at the last few paragraphs of this products consider reduced products further. Okay, so this probably doesn't sound like I'm talking about hypothesis. How about second to the last? Oh, here you see the focus of the present paper is to extend work on graphic warning labels to experimental. And see here, it said experimental. So how can you confuse that with a correlational study? So an experimental paradigm incorporating advertisements for reduced exposure tobacco products. And then they go ahead and say, we examine how those smokers respond to advertisement. We predict, now this is the hypothesis, include a picture will override or reduce the harm claims in the advertisement language and will make the product seem less appealing, right? And we also test, so this is another hypothesis, that there are more than one hypothesis, whether the size of the warning label and picture might influence how people respond to the advertisement. And then we predict, that's right. And then finally, we include 3 types of reduced exposure tobacco products and examine, whether the effects of including a graphic picture and the size of warning label consistent across different types of products. Yeah. So those are the hypotheses, right? And then describe the study in detail. Now I understand the procedure can be a lot. On this part, I will say that most people did a good job. If you try, just try to, summarize without copy word by word. Okay. All right. Then where to find the result? And there's a section called result, right? Now, though you take a look at this numbers, probably they are quite intimidating. If that is the case, you by all means can try to understand that. But if it is a little bit too tough, then you can go to discussion. Usually, the first few paragraphs kind of like the summarize what they're finding. Okay, and then finally the limitations, the future directions. Not every study will mention these. Most of the study will do, but not everyone. So, but if they write things about it, the limitation and the future direction, then it can be found toward the end of the discussion. So let me go to the discussion and show you. So here it is discussion. Usually in discussion, the first few paragraphs summarize their finding, and then they talk about the indication of the findings. Right. And then toward the end, in this case, this study's case, they only talk. It seems that they only talked about the future direction, and it's at the last paragraph. Okay, future research should examine blah blah blah, things like that. This will give you some ideas about your study. If you think this study is interesting and you want to based on this study to conduct a future study, this future direction helps you a lot.